Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
30-year-old Janice Knox looked good in her pale blue skirt with the matching jacket. It looked professional, but still allowed her trim figure to show itself. The fact that it went well with her blonde hair, and that the color of the outfit matched the blue of her eyes didn't hurt at all either. She had been standing in line waiting for her table at Chez Arthur for almost 10 minutes, and was beginning to worry that she wouldn't have much time for lunch if the line didn't move a little faster. She was lost in thought, alternating between concerns about the delay getting a table for lunch and how she would apply the teaching techniques she had seen described and demonstrated in the morning seminar she had just attended. In the beginning, she was not sure that the week spent at the Minnesota Elementary School Teachers Convention would be time well spent, but already, halfway through the second day, she could see the value in the exercise. She was glad that her husband, Arthur, had insisted she take the opportunity when it was presented. Arthur had repeatedly assured her that she would not regret it. Already last night, snug in her bed at the Minneapolis hotel that was hosting most of the seminars, she had told him when she called home to Duluth how right he had been. "Excuse me, ma'am." Somewhere the short phrase had registered with her, but aware that she didn't know anyone in this city, she assumed the words weren't intended for her. There were 3 other teachers from her school district who were also attending the convention, but they hadn't accompanied her for lunch. "Excuse me, ma'am." This time the words were accompanied by a gentle touch on her elbow, and she turned quickly to see who was trying to get her attention. A rather good-looking dark-haired man of about her age, dressed in a conservative dark suit, was smiling at her. Initially, she was a bit flustered by his tap on her elbow, and her momentary discomfort resulted in a slight bit of color appearing in her cheeks. "Yes, what is it?" Realizing that she was in front of several dozen other people, her discomfort eased very quickly, and he could see her visibly relax a bit. "I couldn't help but notice that you're alone in the line, just as I am. Perhaps we could both get faster service if we took a table for 2. Her initial reaction was negative, and she said, "I don't think we should. We don't know each other." As she said it, she realized how foolish that sounded. The man laughed and said, "It's just for a meal. This place is very popular and very busy, and I just think we might get a table a bit more quickly if they know they can put the 2 of us into one slot, so to speak." He held up his left hand and pointed to the wedding ring on his finger and continued, "I'm married, and I have nothing but the most innocent of intentions, but if it makes you uncomfortable, please excuse my suggestion." His words made her realize just how insecure and excessively cautious her words must have sounded to anyone else in the line who might have listened to her initial reaction. She gave a quick laugh and said, "Sure, why not? Perhaps you're right, and we'll get seated and served a little more quickly." She stepped to the side to make room for him and motioned him discreetly to join her. He was at her side almost immediately, and while extending his hand said, "My name is Brent Buckley, and I appreciate your acceptance of my suggestion." They briefly shook hands, and she completed her half of the introductions. "I'm Janice Knox. I'm sorry if I seem to not be with it when you first meet your suggestion. I guess you caught me by surprise." Their agreement to share a table was passed on to the maitre d', and it seemed to work as they were seated at a table for 2 very soon thereafter. A waiter was at their table almost immediately with menus, so it wasn't until after they had each ordered, with Janice quick to mention that separate checks would be required, that they had an opportunity to talk. Brent was the first to get started, by saying, "I really appreciate your decision to share a table with me. I have a sales meeting to get to for 1:30, and I could see my opportunity to have lunch disappearing while I stood in that line." Janice replied with, "I know what you mean. I'm here for a teacher's convention, and my next seminar is at 1:30. The other teachers I was with decided to do some shopping and then grab a hot dog from a street vendor. I just couldn't see missing the chance to eat here. I've heard it's one of the best restaurants in town." They continued with small talk for the next couple of minutes until Brent said, "I wouldn't mind a glass of wine with my lunch. Can I interest you in one?" Janice became a bit flustered again and said, "Oh no, I couldn't. Wine goes to my head, and I need all my faculties for this afternoon's seminars. Thank you for the offer, though. I'll tell you what, Janice. How about I give you a rain check for some day in the future, in case we should happen to run into each other for lunch again?" He laughed slightly, showing that he realized the improbability of that occurring. Janice chuckled as well, and said, "I might take you up on it, but not when I've got to have all of my faculties about me." They continued a leisurely conversation as they ate the delicious light lunches they had ordered. One of the first bits of information they exchanged was information on their families. Brent had a wife and a year-old son, while Janice said that there was only her and her husband for the time being, although they planned on having a family. "Have you been married long, Janice?" "About 1.5 years." Janice hesitated before continuing, "This is my second marriage. My first husband was in the Marines and was killed in action in Afghanistan." Just after suitable condolences were given, the waiter appeared and asked if they were interested in dessert. When the answers were in the negative, he quickly brought their bills, with the implicit expectation that they would leave the table in short order to allow 2 more diners to be seated. "I'm glad to have met you, Brent." We've had a very pleasant conversation after our slightly unorthodox meeting. However, I have to get moving if I hope to be at the next seminar on time. Janice reached over and shook Brent's hand before standing. The pleasure has all been mine, Janice. I wish I had had a teacher in elementary school that was as attractive as you are. I might have done better work. He gave a slight laugh after saying this, and it was returned by Janice, who gave him a little wave before turning to leave. Brent watched her closely as she left the restaurant, his dark eyes almost unblinking in the effort. Once she was on the sidewalk, he took out his cell phone and made a brief call while watching her through the window as she walked away. After hanging up, he quickly left the restaurant. It was just after 8 p.m. the following evening, and Janice Knox was sitting at a table in the hotel bar with the 3 other teachers from Duluth. 2 of them were single, both with a couple of years of experience. The third was about 10 years older than Janice, and like her, she was married. They had decided to spend the evening in the bar to unwind after their 3rd day of attending the seminars they each thought would be the most helpful to them. One of their intentions was to compare notes on the various topics they had covered and how they rated them for their value. The 2 single women, Dana and Arlene, were keeping a close eye on the younger men in the crowd and made no secret of the fact that they were open to the thoughts of a quick hookup if the right man came along. Janice's married coworker, Gloria, made no such statements, but seemed to have a wandering eye as she spent almost as much time as the single women in checking out the men in the bar. Janice had just entered into an intense discussion of the seminar she and Gloria had both selected to attend that afternoon when a man seemed to suddenly materialize at their table. Well, hello, Janice. I guess the chance of us running into each other again wasn't as remote as we thought. Brent Buckley was standing there smiling at her, and once the surprised look on her face eased, she replied, "Brent, how nice to see you again." She turned to her 3 friends, who by this time were all looking at them, and said, "This is the gentleman I told you about. We shared a table at Chez Arthur for lunch yesterday." She turned back to Brent and said, "How do you happen to be here in this particular bar? I really didn't think we'd ever see each other again. I'm staying in this hotel, and thought I'd come down for a quiet drink or 2. I've had a successful day with my sales calls, and I thought a change of pace was in order." Janice chuckled and said, "What a coincidence. We are all staying here too. This is the main venue for the convention we're all attending." The other 3 women seemed to lose a bit of the interest they had shown in Brent as he and Janice continued their conversation. After a couple of mutual comments on how coincidental their meeting again had been, Brent said, "I guess my offer of a rain check for a glass of wine could be cashed in now, if you wish. I won't hold you to wine if you would like something else instead." Janice hesitated only a few seconds before replying, "Sure, why not? I ordered an Irish coffee when I came in here, and it's pretty well empty now. A glass of white wine would be nice, I guess. Would it be all right if I join you ladies at your table? I don't want to impose, if you'd rather I didn't do that, Janice." Brent stood expectantly beside Janice as she quickly glanced at her 3 friends. Not having seen any discouraging signals, she quickly replied, "I think that would be fine, Brent." She laughed nervously before continuing, "Just don't get the wrong idea. Well, thank you for your invitation. I promise to be on my best behavior." He looked around the table at the other 3 ladies and asked, "Would any of you care for a drink as well? I've had a good day with my sales calls, and would be happy to include the 3 of you in my offer." Only Gloria took him up on his offer, ordering a glass of wine as well, but preferring a sparkling variety. After calling over a waitress and giving her the order, he moved an empty chair from an adjoining table and sat down beside Janice. Their order was quickly brought to the table, and Brent charged it to his room. He and Janice soon entered into a conversation about the seminars she had been attending. Gloria would sometimes join into their conversation, but the 2 single women were primarily occupied by flirting with the wide variety of apparently single men who occasionally succeeded in getting one or both of them onto the dance floor. A band was setting up, but a steady stream of bills fed into a sophisticated jukebox system was sufficient to satisfy the audience in the meantime. At precisely 9 p.m. the band commenced playing, and it was soon obvious that their repertoire consisted primarily of ballads. The 2 younger women bounced back and forth between the dance floor and the table with several different partners each before they both seemed to settle on a suitable companion for the evening. By 9:45, their 2 chosen dance partners joined the rest of the party at the table, pulling empty chairs over and fitting them in where possible. Gloria wasn't quite so obvious, but she did accept several requests to visit the dance floor, and it wasn't too long before it was obvious to those who paid attention that she had chosen to favor one particular young man over the others. Brent couldn't help but notice this, and the term cougar came to his mind, although for a second he wondered to himself if the term actually included married women as well as the single and divorced. It seemed as if the volume in the room was slowly increasing, and Brent leaned over to Janice had asked, "Would it be all right if I asked you to dance? It seems that we're on the only ones at the table who haven't been up there yet." It was obvious that Janice had noticed her friends making their way to and from the dance floor, and she quickly replied, "I guess that would be okay. Everyone else seems to be enjoying themselves, so I guess it's okay if we do as well. They were soon on the dance floor, but maintaining several chaste inches between each other. They stayed there for 2 songs before returning to their seats. They had tried conversation, but it was too difficult, particularly with the distance they were maintaining between each other. Thank you very much, Brent. I very much enjoyed that. My husband isn't much into dancing. He's more of an outdoorsman. You know, fishing and boating and that sort of thing. You couldn't have enjoyed it more than I did. Now that we have a child, it's much harder for my wife and me to get out dancing. My job doesn't help matters either. I'm usually out of town every second week, and we tend to spend my time at home together as a family. I can't wait until Arthur and I are able to start our family. Right now, he's just got his dream job, head of the science department at the largest local high school. Once he gets that running the way he wants, he hopes to have more time for the responsibilities of starting a family. I really can hardly wait. Janice was obviously quite pleased by what she had said, as she was smiling broadly. The band announced that they were going to do a selection of Frank Sinatra songs, and as soon as they did, Janice said, I just love Frank Sinatra's music. I know it's from way before my time, but my parents always played it as I grew up, and I guess it stuck on me. It's funny you should say that, Janice. He's always been one of my favorites as well. How about we dance to a few of them? They got up and moved back to the dance floor. Gloria was there with her dance partner, and they appeared to be pasted together. Brent noticed them and tried to mention it to Janice. She couldn't seem to hear him and shrugged her shoulders while giving him a curious look. He took the opportunity to lean in closer to her and whispered into her ear, I think your friend Gloria has found a new close friend. I'll turn around and you can see them over towards the corner. His move to better talk to Janice, combined with his turn to let her see what her friend was up to, resulted in the two of them coming together quite closely. They continued to dance closely together while Janice watched her friend's antics on the dance floor. After about half a minute, she moved her head closer to be better able to speak to Brent and said, I've met her husband. I don't think he would be too happy with what she's doing over there. If I didn't know better, I'd think they were having sex on the dance floor. Her tone of voice had been a bit harsh, conveying her obvious unhappiness with what she was seeing. I very much doubt that she would behave that way in your hometown. She seems to be a bit of a cougar, if you know what I mean. I'm willing to bet that by the time you leave here, she'll be asking you to refrain from mentioning whatever might have happened on this trip to anyone back home. I suspect that your 2 single friends will soon be leaving with their new friends for someplace that caters more to their age group, which will mean they'll be less likely to notice what's going on. They continued to dance to the Sinatra songs, but the space that had been originally kept between them soon evaporated. They weren't dancing as close together as Gloria and her partner, but Brent soon noticed that Janice no longer moved back slightly when her breasts contacted him, or his erection slid against her thigh as they moved. The first couple of times that had happened, she had quickly broken their contact. It now seemed she was more comfortable with him. When the last of Frank's ballads was over, they returned to their seats. The band started a couple of faster numbers, and the 2 single teachers passed them with their partners, on their way to the dance floor. Gloria also returned to the table, and the 3 of them made small talk about the quality of the band. Her dance partner didn't join them at their table, but Brent noticed him standing at the bar, his attention obviously focused on Gloria. After a set of 3 songs, the tempo once again slowed down, and Brent quickly took Janice back to the dance floor. Gloria and her partner soon joined them. Before they had completed the first song, Brent moved his lips closer to Janice's ear and said, It's difficult to really hold a conversation with you here, between the crowd noise and the way the band seems to be getting louder. I don't want you to get the wrong idea, but how would you like to come up to my room, so we could talk more easily? I really find your company very enjoyable, but this is a terrible place to get to know each other. Janice immediately leaned back and gave him a shocked look. I don't think so. I don't know you that well, and could you imagine what the others would say if I left with you? My reputation and probably my marriage would be in shreds, even if all we wanted to do was talk. Brent didn't reply immediately, but eventually said, I realize we've only just met, but I think you should realize I'm not the type of guy to take a girl to my room under false pretenses, and then transform myself into some sort of predator. They continued dancing for another minute before he continued, as far as keeping the others from knowing about it, I've got an idea that should work. If you'd like, I can explain it to you. Janice gave a short laugh before saying, I really can't imagine what you could suggest that could let us pull that off. Me leaving with you to go to your room isn't something they'd be likely to miss. Even though it was only to make it easier to talk, you know what they would think. Brent replied, As long as you are satisfied that you could trust me, there is something we could do to keep it our little secret. I'll take you back to your table and say that I'm going to have to call an end to our evening, as I need to get a good night's sleep for a meeting tomorrow. I'll say my goodbyes and leave. You can hang around with your friends for 10 or 15 minutes before you decide to leave as well, and then you can come by my room. I'll leave the door open for you. Janice was quiet for a short while before saying, You really think that would work, do you? What if one of the others decided to leave as well? Brent laughed before saying, I really don't think that's very likely. Your two young friends are going to be sticking around for a good time, whether it's here or at another bar, and I bet you wouldn't be gone 2 minutes before Gloria and her young guy are seated together. I bet the only thing that couple hasn't decided is whose room to spend the night in. You don't really think she's going to spend the night with him, do you? There was disbelief in Janice's voice as she said that. Brent glanced around the dance floor until he spotted Gloria and her partner back in the quiet corner they had shared earlier. After watching them for a couple of seconds, the said, "Take a look at them now. Pay close attention to where their hands are." Brent turned slightly so that Janice could look over his shoulder at the couple in question. As she glanced at them, he said, "His left hand is on her breast, and it looks like her right hand is between them, somewhere below his belt." A few seconds later, he added, "Don't you think that answers your question?" "I see what you mean, Brent. I'm surprised. She's always seemed so much of a homebody." She giggled before continuing, "I'm sure she'll be saying something to me about what happens in Minneapolis, stays in Minneapolis before we get home to Duluth." Brent didn't say any more, but he noticed that Janice seemed to dance a little more closely to him. He wondered if Gloria's antics had had the effect of making Janice think along the same lines. After a few more moments of thought, he asked, "Well, would you like me to put my little scene in motion? The band is going to take a break now, and it's a natural time for me to say that I'm leaving. I'm in room 512 if you'd like to come up and continue our conversation for a while." Janice sounded nervous as she replied, "I guess that would be okay. I definitely don't want any of the others to realize I'm doing that. So if one of them doesn't react as you expect, I'll call you in your room to cancel." She gave a nervous laugh before continuing, "I may be calling you anyway, if I chicken out." As he walked back to the table, Brent smiled at her and quietly said, "I think you'll find out I'm right about their reaction." The whole party was back at the table since the band had left for their break. Brent quickly told everyone at the table that he was leaving and thanked them for their hospitality. He took out one of his business cards and handed it to Janice, telling her to look him up in Pittsburgh if she was ever there. In less than 2 minutes, he was gone. About 20 minutes later, Brett heard a light tapping on his door. He had left it propped open a few inches with a rolled-up towel, and a couple of seconds after the tapping, the door opened and Janice stepped into his room. She appeared nervous and stood there by the door for a few moments before saying, "I can't believe I'm actually here." She looked down at the towel that was still holding the door open a few inches and continued, I guess I should move this so the door can close and keep anyone I know from walking by and hearing my voice." She reopened the door a few more inches and then used her toe to drag the towel out of the way. When she pushed the door closed, a loud click signaled that the latch had engaged. She seemed to get startled by the sound and quickly looked back at the door before turning and slowly walking over to join Brent. Brent had stood up from one of the two comfortable-looking armchairs that were part of the furniture in the lounge area of his suite. He'd removed his jacket and tie and had a pleasant smile on his face as he welcomed Janice to his room. A king-sized bed dominated half of the room. An iPod attached to a small set of speakers playing music similar to what the two of them had enjoyed in the bar earlier was sitting on a chest of drawers by the bed. The mini music center dispensed a good quality of sound considering its small size. The room showed the normal evidence of a salesman on the road. A briefcase and a leather case marked product information stood near the closet, which had a couple of suits and a garment bag hanging from the rod. A closed laptop computer was resting on the table beside the two armchairs. "So, Janice, can I offer you a drink? I have a small bottle of pre-mixed pina colada that goes down very nicely when it's added to a glass full of ice." Janice had slowly made her way into the room, past the bed which she glanced at, and finally took the offered seat across the table from where Brent had been sitting. "I love pina colada, just don't make it too big of a drink, okay?" While he poured 2 drinks over ice, Brent asked, "I take it that no one expressed any suspicion about you leaving after me?" Janice laughed before saying, "You had my friends pegged perfectly. About a minute after you left, Dana and Arlene announced that they were going to accompany their 2 guys to a bar down the street. It has a very popular local band, and they said the music would be more to their tastes. Gloria made a comment that it was too bad you had left so early. She said that the fellow she had been dancing with had a friend, if I was interested. I don't know if it was the look on her face or the way she said it, but it was easy to see she was implying something more than just a few dances could be involved." After taking the offered drink from Brent and having a small sip to sample it, she continued, "This tastes great. I'll have to take it very slowly with this, as I've already had a couple of drinks, and 2 is usually my absolute limit. You just sip at it slowly, Janice, and I don't think it's going to bother you. I'm certainly not trying to get you drunk." Brant proposed a small toast to their absent spouses, a toast that was agreeably seconded by Janice. Janice seemed to get excited as she said, "I almost forgot to tell you. You were right about Gloria. When I left the table, I went out in the lobby for no more than 2 minutes, and then I went back into the bar. Her young friend was already there at the table with her, and the two of them were whispering back and forth to each other like long-lost lovers." Janice laughed and continued, "I really can't believe that she would act like that. Back at home, she is the picture of propriety and seems to dote on her husband. God, if he could see her now. I just wonder how much she's going to want me to cover up for her. The two of them had a couple of good laughs at the expense of Gloria and her young escort. The two of them were in agreement that she was exhibiting all the signs of a cougar on the prowl for a young guy. For the next few minutes, their conversation drifted slowly towards the topic of the music they had heard that evening in the bar, and that they continued to listen to from Brent's small stereo system. He explained how he had created the playlist on the iPod from his CD collection at home, augmented by selected purchases from iTunes. Janice in turn asked a number of questions on how she could create a similar system for herself. At this point in their conversation, the sound system began playing Sinatra standards, and Brent quickly asked, "How about we dance to a few of these songs? I really enjoyed dancing with you in the bar, and I don't see any reason we couldn't continue here." Within seconds, Janice had agreed, and the two of them slipped off their shoes as they would have made it difficult to dance on the carpeted floor. As they came together, their former style was repeated, and they held each other closely, not in the style of Gloria and her young partner, but comfortably close so that both were well aware of the other's body and its features. The second Sinatra tune was especially slow, and the two of them were barely moving as they danced in the small area between the bed and their armchairs. It wasn't long before Brent released Janice's left hand and moved his own to her left shoulder. His right hand was already just above the swell of her buttocks, and his move now allowed him to use his two arms to pull Janice even more closely to him. At first, Janice stiffened in reaction to his move, but by the end of the song she had performed a similar maneuver by putting both of her arms around his neck and was cooperating with him by pulling him closer. Brent's head was over Janice's right shoulder, and it was easy for him to turn it slightly so that he could begin to lightly kiss and nibble at her neck. Almost immediately, Janice tried to pull him even closer and let out a quiet moan. A few seconds later, she said, "I shouldn't let you do that. I enjoy it too much." She giggled and said, "You're starting to get around my defenses." Brent moved up a bit to her ear and continued with the nibbling and the kisses before quietly saying, "I hope you weren't saying stop. I think I enjoy this as much as you do." He continued with his actions, and while he did so, he moved his right hand down to the swell of her left buttock and caressed it several times before he used it to pull her hips even closer to him. She did nothing to discourage him, and they continued to slowly dance to the music. They continued their mutual fondling throughout the next song until Janice said, "We shouldn't be doing this. We should quit now. If you would like me to let you go, just say the words. I think we're both enjoying ourselves, at least I know I am." He was waiting for Janice to push away from him, but that didn't happen. When the tune finally ended, Brent said, "I'd like us to get these clothes out of the way. It's not too late to stop, though, so I will understand if you would rather leave now. If you stay, I'm going to want to make love to you on that bed." He had moved back so that he could look into her eyes as he said this. She had continued to hold him as he spoke, even though he had removed his hands from her. For several long moments, they looked into each other's eyes until Janice slowly removed her hand from Brent's chest. He was expecting her to take him up on his offer to stop what they were doing, but after a few seconds she moved back and dropped all her clothes on the floor. Brent too got his clothes off. "You have a beautiful body, Janice, and I'm so happy that you have decided to share it with me." He pulled her close, and the two of them began to trace over each other's bodies with their hands. They were sharing a lengthy kiss during the time they conducted their enjoyable exploration. Janice finally broke their kiss and said, "You don't seem to have an ounce of fat on your body, Brent." She ran her hand over the front of his chest and added, "Now I can appreciate what six-pack abs are all about. It's too bad I'll never be able to describe your wonderful physique to anyone. I'm looking forward to enjoying you." They began to kiss again and resumed their explorations of each other's bodies. This time Brent broke their kiss and said, "I want to make love with you now." They soon had wild sex. God, that was wonderful. I can't believe I did this, but it was an experience I won't soon forget. Only my first husband was ever able to make that happen for me. Do you think you'd be able to do that again if I give you some help? Brent quickly replied, "I'm sure I can, with a little help." He chuckled and continued, "I'm sure all it will take is the right kind of help." As they repositioned themselves on the bed, Janice asked, "What is that scar on the side of your ribs? It looks pretty jagged, like something tore it there." Brent gave her an odd look before replying, "I had an accident a while back. Some jagged metal caught me there. The doctor who stitched me up wasn't too worried about how the scar would look." His answer seemed to satisfy Janice as she quickly got on her hands and knees and looked back at him expectantly. They went ahead for round two. When he finally rolled over to lie beside her, Brent looked down at her and said, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think that was it for me." She replied, "I know that, and besides I have to get back to my room. I don't want Gloria or one of the other girls to get back to their room before I do. They could end up phoning me to brag about their evening. I could see Gloria doing that. I just wanted to clean you up before I leave. You've given me an amazing night, one that I won't be able to even tell anyone about." She got down from the bed and began replacing her clothing. Brent joined her, and after slipping on his clothes, he said, You keep my card. If you ever get to Pittsburgh, I wouldn't mind seeing you again. Janice seemed startled by his statement and said, You can forget about that. This was a one-time only thing. I'll have some great memories, but that's all they're going to be, just memories. She reached into her purse and removed his business card. I won't need this, so keep it for one of your customers. She smiled at him before stepping forward to put her arms around him. As they broke the kiss, Brent answered her with, I understand. I must say I enjoyed the experience. He walked with her to the door, and before she stepped into the hallway, he checked both directions for other guests. With the hallway being clear, he held the door open for her. Have a good life, Janice. You too, Brent. Janice began walk down the hallway purposefully, without a backwards glance. Her room was in the same section of hallway as Brent's, and once he saw her disappear into her room, he closed his door and went immediately into the bathroom and had a shower. When that was finished, and he had been able to dry himself off, he walked back into his room. After that, he completely redressed himself before retrieving his cell phone from his briefcase. Before using the phone, he poured himself a full glass of the piña colada and took a long swallow of it. When that was done, he opened his cell phone and pressed a speed dial number. Hi, it's me. Yes, I'm leaving shortly for the airport, and I'll be home by 9 o'clock in the morning. I love you too. A little over 2 months passed. It was just after 10 a.m. on a Saturday when Janice Knox walked out of the stairway door into the parking garage below her apartment building. She was dressed very casually in a pale green tracksuit. Over the past 2 months, there had been changes to her appearance. Her face looked a little thinner, and there were dark circles visible under her eyes. It had become common for her to go out without makeup to hide the ravages of the last 2 months. Some of her friends were worried about her, concerned by her lack of enthusiasm for life. As she reached her car, the sound of several vehicle doors closing could be heard. The sounds came from an older Ford SUV that was parked in the row behind the one containing her car. She had just opened her car door when she sensed a presence beside her and turned. She was about to scream when she realized that the face was known to her. Brent, is that you? Janice was trying to shield herself behind the driver's door while she fumbled in her purse for her cell phone. Just as her question was about to be answered, she realized that there were 3 other men standing behind her car. I'm glad you remember my name, Janice. So how are you? He wasn't smiling like he was the last time she saw him. Are you having a good life? Janice's face went blank for a few seconds before she began to tear up. No, I'm not. She dropped her phone back into the purse because she needed that hand to find a tissue to wipe her eyes. Someone sent pictures and video of that night in Minneapolis to my husband. The tears became more obvious as she continued. When he got them, he started screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names. Now he's divorcing me. I don't even know where he is anymore. He quit his job and left town, and all I can do is speak to his lawyer. As she was describing what had happened, she realized that the 3 men behind her car were exchanging high fives. As she looked back to Brent, she saw that he was grinning at her. Realization came to her, and she almost shouted, You sent him those pictures and that DVD. Why would you do that to me? You've ruined my life. How could you do that to me? She was angry enough now that her tears subsided. Her face was red and had become a tight mask as she tried unsuccessfully to control her emotions. Brent stood there smiling at her for a few moments before answering, You brought it on yourself, Janice. Remember Semper Fi? Her look changed to one of question and curiosity. What does that have to do with what you've done? Semper Fidelis means always faithful, and it should have meant a lot to you when you were married to Adam. You remember him, don't you? Your first husband. Sergeant Adam Dorsey, the Marine. The one you said was killed in action in Afghanistan. His voice was taunting in its tone, and she became a little fearful, although he maintained the same distance from her, and the 3 men behind her car had done no more than move so that they could watch her. I still don't understand, Brent. What does what you've done have to do with Adam? Janice was bewildered now, and the curiosity pushed her anger and tears into the background. Well, I guess you need to hear the rest of the story, as they say. It all started with that Dear John letter you sent him. How you could send something that hurtful and so unexpected to someone fighting a war in a foreign country is beyond us. All he ever did was talk about you and your life together. It was so bad we used to call him Janice as a nickname. He worshipped you, and you must have known that. When you sent him that disgusting email, right out of the blue, you tore his heart right out of him. Before he could continue, one of the men standing at the rear of her car added, You gutted him like a fish. Another of the men piped up with, He must have lost his mind when he read it. Janice looked confused and said, What do you mean? I just told him it was over, and that I had found someone else. I didn't blame him, or try to hurt him. Brent reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of well-worn paper. When he got it straightened out, he read, Dear Adam, there is something you need to know. In a few days you will be receiving divorce papers, as I have decided to end our marriage. It's not your fault. I met someone who has so much more in common with me than you do. He is a teacher, like me. We'll be paying the full cost of the no-fault divorce, and I'm not asking for anything from you. I put all of the furnishings and contents of our rental house into storage and have paid the charges for 1 year. I've paid the rent on the house until the end of the month, but I'll be gone by then. Please don't fight me on this, as it will do no good. The lawyer will be handling everything for me. His name and contact details will be with the divorce papers. I'll be canceling this email address once I send you this message. Goodbye. Janice. This has to be one of the most cold-hearted things I've ever heard of, Janice. All Adam ever did was talk about you and the plans that the two of you had for the future. That house you gave up was supposed to be your home. Adam had arranged with the landlord to buy it when he got out of the Marine Corps. He used to show us his plans for it. He even had the drawings on his computer. There were going to be 2 additional bedrooms for the children he planned on having with you. Tears had formed in Janice's eyes again, and she blurted out, I didn't intend to hurt him. We talked about children, but I didn't know he was that anxious for them. I know he had spoken to the landlord about the house, but I didn't know there was an agreement made. I can't help that I fell in love with someone else. Her tears flooded back as she continued, and now he's gone. He hates me. He even quit the job he loved to get away from me. You won't be getting any sympathy from any of us, Janice. We were all the best of friends with Adam, beyond the fact that he saved our lives and the lives of some of the others Marines more than once. He was a great soldier and a born leader. He'd be alive today if you hadn't sent that damned email. Janice was still sobbing, but she managed to get out. What do you mean? He'd still be alive. He was killed in action. I got the official forms about that. He was killed by an IED. Brett replied scornfully, yes, he was killed by an IED. It wasn't by enemy action, though. He triggered it himself, on purpose, and he was blown to bits. One of the other men continued. One of the surveillance drones spotted an IED being placed, but had no ordnance left to fire at the 2 Taliban who set it up. We all got the coordinates and knew the place we had to avoid until they sent explosive ordnance disposal to disarm it. The day after you got your damned email, we were on a patrol that took us near the location of that IED. Brent took over the story again as he said, Adam hadn't been right since he got it. He wouldn't talk to us, and it was obvious that he was really upset, but trying to hide it from us. I don't think he even slept that night before our patrol went out. I tried talking to him several times, but he wouldn't open up to me. When we got to the area where the IED was placed, he called a halt to our forward progress and told us to take a break. The next thing I knew, I could see him walking towards the location the EOD had flagged on our patrol map. I started running after him, telling him to stop, but he got to the location just after I noticed what he was doing. Brent had tears in his eyes, and he wiped them away before continuing. I could see him walking back and forth in the vehicle ruts, looking for the trigger. He stepped on it when I was still almost 100 yards away from him. The IED must have been a large one, at least half a dozen artillery shells, probably enough to have blown an Abrams tank all to hell. There were only small pieces of him left after the dust cleared. That scar on my chest was caused by a piece of shrapnel from one of the shells. Or maybe it was a piece of Adam's body armor. I have no idea. Janice was still visibly upset when she said, that's not what they said in the papers they sent me. There was nothing about him causing the explosion on purpose. There was nothing about his death being a suicide. Again, one of the men at the rear of the car spoke up with, Brent had the lieutenant write the reports to make it seem like he was killed by enemy action. None of us wanted to see Adam's official records end with a finding of suicide. The rest of us who were there were happy to go along with it. Janice was doing better at trying to control herself as she said, well, you certainly got your revenge. My life is ruined, and so is Arthur's. He didn't deserve this. Brant was quick to reply, we think he certainly did deserve it. He had to have known you were a married woman when he got involved with you, and he is every bit as guilty as you are in Adam's death. He won't get any sympathy at all from us. It was obvious that Janice was starting to lose control of her emotions again as Brent continued. There is one person who should have been here when we told you what this was all about. It was her idea, but she couldn't come. Janice had been listening and quickly asked, what do you mean, her idea? Was there a woman in your squad? Brett replied, no, this was my wife's idea, but our son has a cold, so she stayed at home with him. We were trying to figure out how we would exact an appropriate revenge for Adam. The only things we could think of involved violence, but I guess that's almost understandable considering everything we've all gone through over the years in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were talking about it at my place, having a beer in the living room, and I guess that my wife was listening. She said that since you had been cheating on Adam, and his suicide was caused by that and your decision to divorce him, it was fitting that we try to cause your second marriage to end in divorce, again because of your cheating. Janice was shocked and said, you mean you planned all of this? You planned everything that happened in Minneapolis. My wife gave us the big picture of how we could do it, and the four of us did what we could to make it happen. Adam told us everything we needed to know to carry it off, plus a lot of things we didn't need to use. The music you prefer, the type of drinks you like, and even what turns you on sexually. Adam filled us in on all of that, many times over during the months we spent with him. He adored you, and he couldn't stop talking about you. There was another person who helped as well. Ernie, over there, has a cousin who was a Marine, and he got a temporary janitorial job at your school to help us find out whatever we could about you. As he was speaking, one of the three men raised his hand. Brent continued, "We weren't sure how to do it, and were originally planning on trying to get close to you in Duluth. My wife had volunteered me to be the one who tried to seduce you, because she claims that I have a real gift of gab. She said my charm worked on her, so I should be the one to try getting close to you." Sure, she was a bit jealous, but she knew what Adam meant to us. I'm trying hard to make it up to her, and we're going to be all right. Ernie, Ramon, and Frank followed you around Duluth, trying to get a handle on your routines, when all of a sudden we found out through Ernie's cousin that you were going to be going to Minneapolis for that convention. As he had mentioned their names, the other two men had raised their hands, making sure that Janice knew who they were. They took turns following you around Minneapolis, and when they saw you go into that restaurant alone, they let me know, and I hurried over so that I can see what might work in my attempt to meet you. I don't think it could have worked out better. Then the next night, they let me know when you went into the bar with your friends. From there on, I was just winging it, giving you the chance to show your true colors. Every step of the way, I gave you the chance to say no. You never did put a stop to what was happening. I guess that saying, once a cheater, always a cheater, isn't too far wrong. Frank had set up 2 high-quality cameras with sensitive microphones in the suite I had, and they got every second of your infidelity in perfect detail. He edited the 2 videos to produce one that showed everything that happened from the best angle. By the time your husband watched it, if he could stand watching it all, he knew exactly what you are, a cheating 304. It's no wonder he left town. His final words had reduced her to a sobbing wreck. She collapsed onto the front seat of her car, her feet on the concrete of the parking garage while she held her head in her hands. The 4 men watched her for about half a minute before Brent signaled that they should go back to their SUV and leave. Just before walking away, he said, "Like I told you before, Janice, have a good life." He didn't get a reply this time. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.